History doesn't always erase people with violence. Sometimes it erases them quietly. No gunshots, no mass graves, no headlines, just silence. Today's story is about a disappearance that doesn't look like tragedy at first glance. A disappearance where people are still alive, still breathing, still walking the same streets, but somehow no longer exist in history. This is the story of how entire identities vanish without anyone noticing. We often imagine erasure as destruction: libraries burned, cities leveled, cultures wiped out in flames. But the most effective erasure doesn't destroy, it edits. It removes names from records. It changes spellings. Mueller becomes Miller, Nguyen becomes Nguyen, El Jamal becomes Jamal. Each shift a tiny surrender. It redraws categories. It rewrites census forms. It simplifies complex people into manageable labels. And once that happens, the past becomes unrecognizable, even to the people who lived it. Imagine this: a community that has lived on the same land for centuries. They have their own dialect, words for mist that rises only in autumn, for the exact moment a river changes its mind. They have customs: how to greet elders, how to mourn, how to celebrate a first tooth. They know exactly who they are, not because it's written down, but because it's lived daily, in the steam of morning tea, in the rhythm of a shared song, in the way hands move when preparing food. Then a new administration arrives, not with soldiers, but with paperwork. Clipboards, inkwells, official stamps. New forms ask new questions, questions that don't quite fit. What is your nationality? But they've never thought of themselves as a nationality. They are of this valley, of this river, of this soil. What language do you speak at home? But their tongue has no name on any government list. What religion are you? But their prayers blend ancestor and earth in ways no doctrine captures. There is no box for who they actually are, so they choose the closest option, the one that won't bring trouble, the one that might bring a permit, a school, a chance. Then their children choose it again. Then their grandchildren are taught that option is the truth. And just like that, a people disappear. This has happened again and again across history, not through genocide, but through classification. In 19th century India, the British census forced fluid identities into rigid boxes: Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, erasing syncretic traditions that had blended for centuries. In the American West, boarding schools didn't just ban native languages, they replaced kinship terms. Children were taught to say brother and sister instead of the precise words for maternal cousin, paternal aunt, clan sibling, flattening entire social universes into nuclear simplicity. In the Soviet Union, dozens of distinct ethnic groups were folded into broader categories like Tatar or Uzbek, not for accuracy, but for administrative ease. Convenience became identity. Empires loved categories. Colonial governments depended on them, because once people are categorized, they can be managed, taxed, moved, controlled. The problem is, humans don't fit neatly into boxes, so the boxes reshape the humans instead. Consider language. Languages don't usually die when the last speaker dies. They die when parents stop teaching them to children. And that usually happens under pressure. A school teacher wrapping knuckles for a wrong accent, a job application requiring fluency in the national tongue, a radio broadcast that never plays your songs. At first, parents switch languages out of survival. They want their children to succeed, to be safe, to belong. But success comes at a cost. Within 2 or 3 generations, the old language survives only in fragments. A word for a specific kind of rain, a phrase whispered when lighting a candle, a lullaby no one fully understands anymore, just hums because the melody lives in the bones. Eventually, even those disappear. What's lost isn't just vocabulary, it's a way of seeing the world. The Yupik of Alaska have dozens of words for sea ice, each describing texture, age, danger. Without those words, the ice becomes just ice, flat, silent. The Guguyi Mithir of Australia navigate not with left and right, but with cardinal directions, north of the tree, west of the river. Their entire reality is oriented to the Earth's spine. Lose the language, and you lose that compass in the soul. When a language dies, a worldview dies with it, and history rarely notes the loss. Erasure also happens through renaming. Borders change. Cities are renamed. Streets honor new heroes. Istanbul was once Constantinople. Before that, Byzantium. Each name carried empires. Each renaming declared, "This story is over. A new one begins." In southern Africa, colonial maps redrew rivers and mountains with European names, Victoria Falls, Mount Kenya, erasing indigenous names that held creation stories, warnings, blessings. An elder might still call a place by its old name, Crocodilopolis, the city of crocodiles, long after it became Cairo. To outsiders, it sounds wrong, incorrect, suspicious. To them, it's the only name that ever made sense. Over time, even people stop trusting their own memories. They hesitate before telling stories that don't match textbooks. They lower their voice when recalling the past. They add disclaimers. This might not be accurate. This is just what we heard. I don't know if this is true. History has trained them to doubt themselves. That doubt is powerful because once people stop trusting their memories, erasure is complete. One of the most effective tools of erasure is normalization. When a rewritten history is repeated often enough, it stops feeling imposed. It becomes how things have always been. Children grow up learning a version of the past that feels neutral, factual, unquestionable. They don't know what's missing because missing things leave no outline. You can't miss a story you were never told existed. This is why erased histories are hard to recover, not because evidence doesn't exist, but because people no longer know what to look for. Old photographs are misidentified. Family names are altered beyond recognition. Documents are filed under categories that didn't exist at the time. The trail goes cold, not suddenly, but gradually, like footprints washed away by everyday rain. And yet, erasure is never perfect. It always leaves residue. In food, a spice blend that makes no sense in the official cuisine. In music, a rhythm that predates the national anthem. In rituals, why do we light candles on this night? Why do we leave a chair empty? The answer was lost, but the practice remains, a ghost in the machine of memory. These inconsistencies are cracks in the narrative. History leaks through them. Sometimes recovery begins accidentally. A student researching a family tree finds a birth certificate with a name no one recognizes. A musician tracing a melody discovers it traveled across oceans in the holds of slave ships. An archivist stumbling upon misfiled documents, category miscellaneous, finds a people's entire archive labeled unclassifiable. Sometimes it begins emotionally, a feeling that something doesn't add up, that the official story feels too clean, too convenient. That discomfort is often the first step toward truth. The recovery is not easy because uncovering erased histories challenges power. It forces uncomfortable questions. Who benefited from this forgetting? Who gained legitimacy by making others invisible? And why was silence easier than acknowledgement? That's why many erased stories survive not in institutions, but in people, in elders who remember a different version of events, in communities that preserve identity quietly without permission, in traditions passed down without explanation because explanation would invite scrutiny. Survival through discretion. This is the paradox of erasure. The more complete it seems, the more fragile it actually is, because it depends on silence. And silence breaks. Every time someone asks, "Why does my family do this? Why does my grandmother say it that way? Why does this story contradict the textbook?" The past stirs, not to return unchanged, but to be acknowledged. History doesn't need to be rewritten to include erased people. It needs to be expanded, to accept that the past is layered, messy, contradictory, that multiple truths can coexist even when they're uncomfortable. Erasure convinces people they were never meant to be remembered. Recovery reminds them they were never meant to disappear. Not everything forgotten was insignificant. Not everything undocumented was unimportant. Some things were erased precisely because they mattered. The most dangerous idea for any system built on erasure is this: that memory doesn't need permission, that identity doesn't require validation, that history is not owned by maps, archives, or flags, but by people who lived it. And as long as people remember, even quietly, even imperfectly, erasure fails. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. Because history can silence voices, but it cannot stop people from asking why the silence exists, and that question, asked enough times, brings everything back into the light. If you've ever felt that part of your past was missing, that your story didn't quite fit the official version, you're not imagining it. Sometimes what feels like absence is actually evidence. Evidence of something that was never meant to survive, but did. History forgets. People remember. And memory is where erased stories wait to be found again.